Hi Pop-Tarts, I've just finished an amazing homemade smoothie. It's definitely coming up for summer now here, so I made myself something completely magical, and it's just so energising and lovely. I used half a cucumber, some strawberries, some kiwis, the juice of one orange, the juice of half a lemon, and 2 bananas, and a couple of spoonfuls of vanilla yoghurt, and it was lush. Definitely try it. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about my own experiences with depression and some of the things that have helped me to deal with my depression. I want to start by saying that I do not consider myself as having healed from depression. I don't see depression as something that I used to have in the past tense, although I may sometimes talk about it that way. I may sometimes say, oh, I used to suffer from depression. What I really mean is that I used to not be able to have ways of coping with it. It used to be something that I would drown in. It used to be something that would overtake me completely. Whereas now I feel I have coping strategies, I feel that I have ways of dealing with it. I do not feel that I'm recovered from it. I think that I have a depressive personality. I know that chronic depression runs in one side of my family, and I feel that there's really no aim to kind of ultimately release myself from it, so much as there is an aim to own it and understand it and find ways of coping with it in a healthy kind of context, and I think I have done that. My thoughts on this subject are really scattered and all over the place. I tried to make some notes and it was really difficult to do, but I do want to get this video out, and I feel somehow called lately to talk more about my own experiences with mental health and my own journey with mental health, and I feel called to write about that more as well. I've just recently written a blog post about self-harm and some of my thoughts about my own journey with self-harm. I'll link that for you below, and I've also just today released a blog post which is a transcript of a discussion that my boyfriend and I had about depression and anxiety. He suffers with both depression and anxiety, and we actually had a dialogue, and I recorded it and then I typed it up for the blog, which was an interesting and creative way to use my blog. I've not used it in that way before, so I'll link that below as well, and you might kind of get a lot out of that if you're kind of coming to this video for tips or for a more heightened awareness and understanding of depression and what it's about. Or indeed if you suffer with it and you're kind of looking for a different perspective, then reading the dialogue between my boyfriend and I might be quite interesting for you too. When I talk about my depression, I'm talking about something specific. So I'm not talking about something that's based on any internal or external factors that I can accurately pinpoint or that are actually going on at the moment that are clearly contributing to my sense of feeling blue or my sense of feeling very upset. It doesn't really work like that. Depression is very specific. It seems to be causeless. I could have just won the lottery or gone on a beautiful, like, exotic holiday. I could be lying on a beach in the Bahamas. When the wave comes over me, and I call it a black wave, it's there. It's depression. There's no real explanation for it, and that's why it's so frustrating and disheartening when, you know, you're with a partner or you have a friend or a family member to whom you've explained, you know, the details of depression and what it is and what it means, and time after time they ask, you know, oh, well, why are you feeling that way? What's happened? What's gone wrong? How can we put it right? How can we fix it? What's the matter? Like, what actually happened to make you feel so bad? It's so endlessly frustrating because there really is nothing. You know, the depression doesn't hang on anything. There certainly are triggers, there certainly are things that would make it worse, I would say. I wouldn't say that necessarily there's anything I can pinpoint that starts it, but there are certainly things that make it worse, and there are certainly things that ease it, and I have had to own my role in learning what those things are that exacerbate it and what those things are that ease it, what those things are that help me to cope with it and help me to get through it. So it's not really so much a case of getting rid of it, it's a case of making sure my head's in the game to sort it out when it actually comes over me. So yeah, there's really no kind of factor that you can determine that creates this black wave, as I call it, and people have different names for it, but to me it feels like a black wave. It's just this awful, intense, overpowering melancholy which absolutely shrouds around me and goes up over my head, and I know that it's depression as soon as I feel it hit me, because it just feels so different to anything that you can pinpoint and understand. You know, when you go through a breakup or you lose your job or somebody dies, you feel that the sadness is connected to something specific, and there might be other factors around it that kind of dance in that same territory, but essentially it's connected to something specific. You don't feel that with depression. I certainly don't, and I've not spoken to anybody who does. It's very different. It's very all-consuming, and it's very difficult to pinpoint or describe or explain, and it's certainly very difficult to push away. It's like that. You know, it's very different to an ordinary kind of sadness that has a causal factor. The first time I experienced depression was that I remember was when I was 10 years old, and when I was 10 years old was also the first time that I thought about killing myself. And I struggled on and off with low moods that went on for indeterminate amounts of time, and I first started self-harming when I was 14 years old, and that was my coping mechanism for not only a lot of the chaotic crap that was going on in my outer life, in my family life, etc., but was also my way of coping with my depression, with the darkness that would come over me. And so, you know, I did that I self-harmed from the ages of 14 to 21. Yeah, I self-harmed from the ages of 14 to 21, so that's 7 years that I was actively cutting myself for as a coping mechanism. I attempted suicide at the age of 17 through slitting my wrists. I ended up in hospital. After that, I went through quite a long bout of therapy. I had a mental health breakdown when I was 19 years old, and I would say that I didn't really recover from that completely. I didn't come out the other side of that until I was 21, and during that time I went through another massive bout of therapy. I was also given some diagnoses that had been withheld from me before, so I started to get a better understanding of what was actually going on with me. It was pretty evident to my mother that I had problems from a young age, and it was not it didn't escape her that problems ran in the family, that her mother actually had mental health problems of her own, markedly different from mine in many respects, but still it was there. And, you know, she'd noticed kind of a long line of depression and, you know, just melancholia that just ran through the family. My mother has it too, you know, she just gets very low for no specific reason, and it's very difficult for her to fight her way out of that. So, you know, she always kind of knew that there was that in the family. There have also been instances of self-harm with other people in the older generations of my family. Learning about these things, learning about the ancestral traits, and learning about kind of the fact that my mother had identified some of what I was doing, having kind of lived with other members of the family and known other members of the family as she grew up, was illuminating for me, because it made me realise that some of these things are genetic and they do run through the family line. My boyfriend has the same thing. My boyfriend has a long line of depression and anxiety and eating disorders on his mother's side of the family, and these things have come through. Bipolar as well as in his family. So it's interesting to know that, and it kind of arms you with the information that you need. It empowers you somewhat when you know that, and you do feel like there is more of a sense of cause and effect, and things do start to make a little bit more sense. Of course, the flip side of that is that some people kind of use the fact that it's a genetic thing, or it runs through the family line, or something of that nature. Some people do use that in order to just shroud themselves in victimhood mentality and never do anything to kind of take charge of the situation, and never actually own the fact that they are accountable for the way they deal with their anxiety, depression, eating disorders, whatever it might be. So I think it's really important to understand that you're still accountable, even though it might be illuminating and it might arm you with the kind of sense of understanding and self-knowledge. Realising that it goes through an ancestral line, that doesn't give you an excuse to shroud yourself in it and forever kind of believe that it is beyond you to do anything about it. And I think that's something really important that I would say. At the age of 21, when I came out the other side of my mental health breakdown, I stopped self-harming on the kind of loving insistence of a boyfriend that I had just kind of gotten into a relationship with. Unfortunately though, because I really hadn't dealt yet with the reasons why I was using that as a coping mechanism, and because it was something that really didn't kind of get pinpointed and worked on and kind of focused on in therapy, I just moved straight on to an eating disorder. Unfortunately, I fell into patterns with regard to restricting food, exerting myself overly, which is actually a form of bulimia when you exercise too much. Really just restricting my food, restricting my calories, and trying to gain a sense of control that way over my life. So really, you know, I've had a long battle and a very kind of intimate knowledge of and experience with different mental health issues that have gone on for a prolonged period of time, and I definitely would say that I'm fully healed from my tendencies with eating and fully healed from my tendencies with self-harm. However, I'll always consider myself to have a depressive personality. It's just that I feel that I've found such incredible coping strategies for it now, but I would never say that I don't get blue reasonless, because I absolutely do. You know, it is a part of me. And I think it's really important to talk about it not as something that I need to heal from, or something that I need, you know, a code that I need to break, because it's not really like that. I talk about it more in terms of the coping strategies that I've developed, and honestly, quite honestly, it feels really weird to describe myself as somebody with depression now, because I don't let it kick my arse anymore. I have been treated for my depression with various different forms of counselling and psychotherapy in the past. I've been treated for my depression with antidepressants. I was on them for a period of about 18 months. I've treated myself in various different ways, with various different spiritual practices and mindfulness techniques and stuff like that. I've, you know, tried different ways of kind of heightening my vibration and seeing my depression in a different way, reframing it, if you will. I do not believe for a second that there is one right way to deal with depression. I do not believe for a second that there is a blanket statement that you could ever make about depression in terms of the treatment of it. And I think that kind of stuff is really dangerous. And actually in the blog post that I've linked below, where my boyfriend and I are discussing our own kind of feelings about depression and anxiety and the treatment of these things, we do go into the danger that often arises when people throw a blanket statement over something, or they say that everybody should be on medication, or everybody should throw their medication away, or, you know, anything like that. I think is really dangerous, and anything like that is just a one-size-fits-all ideology, which always leads to disaster. And that's something that my boyfriend says in the transcript for the blog post that I totally agree with. It does lead to disaster. We need to be respecting people's individual stories. And in my video not too long ago about my chronic pain journey, I do state that as a student of Jung, I'm very interested in the story. The story of the individual is what creates the cure. You know, telling the story in itself can quite often be an incredibly healing remedy, because you identify and you come home to the fact that it's your story, it's your particular hero's journey, it's your kind of epic exploration that is very unique to you. So I think it's really important that we don't lump people in together, and we don't start talking about one-size-fits-all answers to problems like depression and anxiety. It's got to be individual, and it's got to be based on the needs of the individual and the individual's experiences. One person may get a lot out of medication. One person might feel that they are taken out of crisis when they're placed onto medication. They might feel that they become more stable. They might feel that they become more high functioning. For other people, medication is a nightmare. They go onto medication, they feel worse, you know. And there are different kinds of medication. Sometimes you need to experiment. Sometimes you need to kind of play the field a little bit and see what works for you. And your doctors and psychiatrists can help you with that to find the right thing. Medication was not right for me, but I would never say in a million years that means it's not right for anybody else. That's not for me to say that, and I think it would be intensely arrogant and very dangerous to say that. When I first started looking at a lot of the dialogue and a lot of the blogging and a lot of the kind of depression culture online, you know, people that want to talk about depression online and exchange tips and exchange stories, I started to realise that there was this pattern that was emerging, and this pattern, this way of thinking that was emerging, that that I don't actually conform to, and that I'm not really in alignment with. Quite often I noticed people that struggle with depression saying things like that they had to cut off certain friends or family members because those friends or family members were trying to insist that the depressed person wasn't trying, was being lazy, wasn't really like looking at all the options, wasn't really making enough of an effort to get through it, wasn't really, you know, healing from it, progressing from it when they could have been, that kind of stuff. And so they had to kind of like cut away from those family members or friends because they weren't real, you know, they weren't really caring. They weren't really understanding that depression is not something that you can stop. It's not something that you can control. It's not something that you can do anything about. And this is a very widespread part of the dialogue in the kind of online, you know, like depression discussion, if you like. And I don't really relate to it. Like, I do believe that I am a person who suffers with depressive episodes. Absolutely, I do. And I don't believe that there is necessarily anything that you can do to stop that in its entirety or to somehow release yourself from the bonds of it. However, I do believe that there are coping mechanisms that you can find that help you to live a normal, high-functioning, creative and successful life. I do believe that there are techniques that everybody can create their own medicine bag, their own toolkit. I believe that there is a great deal of work to be done with regard to owning your depression, understanding what your depression looks like, what you need to help yourself with it. And those are things that I think you can do, and those are things that I think you can be very, very proactive about. And I think quite often that it's one thing to say you know, like, you've got nothing to be depressed about, which is an incredibly unhelpful thing to say to somebody with depression, because we don't know what we're depressed about anyway. That's why it's called depression. It has no determining factor. It has no influencing factor, right? It's just depression. So all of these things, like, you've got nothing to be depressed about, or you're just not trying hard enough, or you're just lazy, obviously these things are not compassionate, and they don't show an understanding of what the landscape of depression is really like, and what it's all about, and how it feels, and how it works. However, on the other hand, I do feel like a lot of the dialogue that goes on amongst people with depression online is very much in the vein of, well, there's nothing that you can do about it. I can't help it. I can't help but be sad and melancholy. I can't help but not be able to drag myself up off the floor. And that, I think, is dangerous too, because that goes too far in the other direction. And, you know, in that direction, there's really just this whole attitude of, well, I can't do anything to help myself. It's depression, and therefore I'm powerless, and therefore I'm completely enslaved, and therefore I'm small and weak and useless. I can't do anything about it. It's like depression is this great big otherworldly monster, and there's just nothing that you can do to deal with it, to strategize around it. And that I don't agree with, because I have found coping mechanisms, I have found strategies, I have improved my life tenfold in the last 10 years, and I've found ways of helping myself to deal with it, and helping myself to understand it and own it and live with it and thrive in spite of it. And so I really think it's important that the dialogue kind of stays in this middle ground whereby, yeah, okay, you shouldn't have to tolerate or put up with somebody really bolshy and domineering who doesn't have a clue about depression telling you that you're just lazy, you're just too lazy to deal with it, or, you know, you just need to, like, go out for a walk and it will go away. You don't need that crap, okay, obviously, but I think it's really important that the dialogue doesn't go too far into the other direction where people with depression are just insisting that there is nothing that they can do to help themselves, because that's BS. And that worries me too on a human level, and as somebody with depression, it worries me that there are people talking about how there's nothing they can do about it, and that anybody that tells them that there is anything they can do to change the situation even remotely just doesn't understand depression, because that's not true. I've had depression for a long time. I do understand it. I do know how it feels. It's a black wave and it just comes over you, and it is just dreadful. But on the other hand, I do believe there are things that you can do to cope with it and to kind of integrate it into your sense of who you are in a healthy way, not to allow it to become toxic and not to allow yourself to drown in it. I know you can do that because I've done it, and I'm a living testament to the fact that you can do it. And like I said, people are going to do it in different ways, absolutely fine. Everybody has individual needs, everybody has a different individual experience with depression, but there are things that you can do. The way I see it, right, is that my depression is not my fault. My depression is not my fault. It's not something that I should hate myself over. It's not something that I need to forgive myself for. It's not something that is only occurring because I'm lazy. It's not something that is only occurring because I have no interest in changing it. However, there was a point in the past when I needed to have a word with myself, because although I can kind of reason that depression isn't my fault and that it's not something that I can necessarily kind of control coming over me, there was a point where I realised that I was feeding into it. I was kind of shrouding myself in it. I was fixating over it. I was convincing myself that there was nothing I could do to change it, even though I hadn't tried doing anything to change it. And so really I was feeding into my own narrative. And when you actually realise that, and you come to a point of realising that, it's a magical moment in your life when you start to think, okay, I've told myself that there's nothing I can do about this, and I've been feeling sorry for myself over it for a long time now. Nothing's changed. What about if I actually try putting some techniques into play? What about if I try experimenting? What about instead of shrouding myself in it, I actually start to empower myself and try different things and actually see what kind of results I get? And that for me was a big turning point, you know, because it's very easy to shroud yourself in the misery of depression and insist there's nothing you can do about it. But you've got to try, and you've got to take baby steps, and you've got to keep coming at it time after time and dealing with it in different ways, you know. And owning that part of the journey, that part of your journey is important. So that's something that I realised for myself. And then after that, things started to change very rapidly. One of the first things you can start to do is look at the patterns that might come into play when you are depressed, when you're going through a depressive episode, when you're going through a low mood. You might notice that there are certain things that trigger you to go to kind of new levels of low. There are certain things that don't do you any good. There will be certain situations that stress you out, certain people that drain you. And quite often you can't cut these people or these situations out of your life completely, but you can reduce them, or you can press the pause button on them, or you can put them on a meter meter, as it were, you know? You can choose your level of involvement. You can understand that when you're having a depressive episode, there are certain things that are just not going to help you, that are only going to drive you up the wall and make you worse. You can also have a look at little things that have brightened your mood or elevated you even just slightly while you've been in a depressive episode. And it might be just the tiniest little things, you know, things that you never even thought would make a discernible difference. But actually when you look back over the last few weeks or the last few months, you think to yourself there were certain things. And for a lot of people, it's things like eating a really nutritious meal of some kind or another, or treating yourself to a favourite food, or it's something like spending time around a child, your nephew or a friend's baby, or spending time around an animal, you know, a pet, somebody's pet, or your own pet. Having quality time with an animal is a really good one. For some people it's just sitting out in the garden and just getting those breaths of fresh air and listening to the trees blowing in the wind. It's tiny things, it's those little things, watching a sunset, watching a sunrise. Anything you can think about that you remember gave you a little bit of a boost, write that down on a piece of paper, because there are certain things that can elevate you and lift you, and it's your responsibility to put these things into the mix when you're having a depressive episode. Having a dialogue with yourself on a daily basis, talking to yourself, is so important, and it's one of the major things that helped me to kick my depression into touch and help me to kind of own it and understand what it is that I need to deal with it each time. And my self-talk as well, checking in with my self-talk. Like I said, depression is not something that I feel that I need to forgive myself for or berate myself for, you know. It's not my fault. And so it's really important not to give myself negative self-talk. And if I try to pull myself out in one way or another and I end up stumbling for a moment, it's important to talk to myself with love, you know, and not with anger, not with malice, not with criticism and mockery. It's important to just keep holding your hand and supporting yourself. And when I say having a dialogue with yourself, I mean checking in consciously. Check in with what you need, check in with how you feel, rate your mood on a scale of 1 to 10. Anything you can do like that. If you don't feel comfortable sitting down and asking yourself questions or listening to yourself in the moment and thinking, how do I feel in my body, how do I feel in my mind, you know, if that seems a little bit woo-woo or a little bit hard to get to for you, then literally just rate your emotions from 1 to 10. Start in the morning and then do it again before lunch and then do it again after lunch and do it again at dinner. Just anything where you are tuning in with yourself, checking in with yourself, being with yourself, acknowledging that you're going through something difficult and you're trying to deal with it, you're trying to get through it. And so you're monitoring your emotions, you're checking in with how you're doing, and you're noticing those subtle little shifts and ups and downs through the day. That is just a way of holding your hand. It's a way of being there for yourself, and it's so important to do that. I know I always say this, and I have said this a fair few times, but really, really get right with what's going on with you in the morning. A morning routine is so useful, just setting that intention, you know, and setting your vibration for the day. Some people's morning routines are super elaborate, some are super simple and rudimentary, but whatever it is, just have that little thing that you do each morning that just plugs you in. For me at the moment, I meditate pretty much every morning, and at the moment I'm really into running. I just love to go for a run. And you know, it just plugs me in just before I do anything, before business starts for the day in any way, whatever that means for you, whatever it means for me. Just checking in with yourself, sit at the altar, light a candle, go through the prayer beads, go for a run. You know, just do something beautiful for yourself that plugs you into the world and that plugs you in with your sense of who you are and what you want to bring to the day. I know it's really difficult, really, really difficult to find the motivation to do this when you're depressed. I totally understand that. But the thing you've got to understand about momentum is that it's you that starts to build it, and you have to build it. There is no chip that I can put in your head to make you motivated. There is no shortcut. There is no secret back door. There is no, you know, magic skeleton key that unlocks this for you. Momentum begins to build because you start to put one foot in front of the other, and that is the truth. And so you really have to just take that one small step. And, you know, when you are really depressed, if you are so depressed that you're not working, you're not going outside, then I know that for you, making yourself a cup of tea or a sandwich or doing a little bit of cleaning is massive. It's a massive step. So for you, do that thing. Just, you know, get a cloth out and put some polish over the table, or just put the kettle on and stand there and just listen to it. Just listen to it boiling and think, I'm going to make myself a cup of tea. I'm just going to do that. That's all I'm going to do. Set yourself a tiny little goal. You know, it doesn't have to be something mammoth and overwhelming. It can be something so small, but it gives you that momentum. Once you've done that, you start to feel empowered, and you start to think quite often like, could I try doing something a little bit more? I feel better now. The endorphins are going. I've done something for myself, you know, and I'm more in the moment now. And so that can just be amazing when you're really depressed, is just give yourself that little piece of empowerment. And it's so difficult, but once you've done it and it's done, the feeling, the payoff, you get so much back on that investment, I promise you. Explore passions from your past. Think about what used to switch you on when you were a kid. What was it that you lost hours to? What was it that you did effortlessly? You know, what was it that you could have done without sleeping or eating or noticing, you know, where your parents were and what was going on or what the time was? Like, what were those things when you were a kid that were your sincere passions? And they might not necessarily be activities. They might be colours or books or films or, you know, like learning about dinosaurs or whatever it is. Just tap into those past passions and really allow yourself to see where that goes. Cry, that's another really good one. Crying is a gateway. Crying lets in so much wisdom and lets out so much baggage, so much weight. You exchange the weight, the burden, for the light, the majesty, that glorified release. Crying is just so important to me, and for a lot of people, when you're depressed, it's scary to cry, it's frightening to cry. You don't want to let it go because you think you'll never ever stop, and it will feel so bad, it will be so painful. And so you keep it in, you suppress it, you hold it back. And when I started to let myself cry, really, really let go and cry, and it was when it was the first flat I lived in with my boyfriend that I really started to let myself go there. So I was 21 when I first moved in with my boyfriend, and I used to really just let it go, you know, and I'd do it on my own. I'd sit in the bath and I'd just really let it go, and I was letting go of a lot of stuff. It wasn't just stuff that was going on in the moment. It wasn't depression kind of from the moment. It was a long spate of times before when I'd had depression, when I'd held it in, especially times when I'd been living at home with my mum and my siblings. I held it in. I didn't feel like I had that place to go, you know, so I really let a lot of stuff out. And I think it's just such an important thing to do. If it's been a while since you had a cry and you're depressed, I promise you're not going to break. You're not going to break. And the darkest moment comes just before dawn with crying. That's especially true. It feels so dark, and then suddenly it just lifts, and it's so good. And by the end of it, sometimes you're like out of breath, you know, you've really just let it go. And it is scary, but I believe in you, you know, I believe in you. Hold your own hand and do it, because it can often be a form of release, a form of relief for you when you're depressed. If you're not going outside much, if you're finding it difficult to get outdoors, I totally understand that. This is something that hasn't happened to me for, again, about 10 years now. I've spent a good 10 years perfecting and sharpening these tools and encouraging myself to put them into motion, because it's really difficult to do that when you're so down, you know. So I've found ways to unlock, to tap into and unlock and utilise my sense of momentum. And that's something that's really important to do. But if you're really struggling to get out of the house and you don't think you can put your foot over that threshold into the outside world, then I would recommend whatever you're doing, be facing a window. And this is advice that you'll see online in various places, and I totally agree with it. Be facing the window, have the window open if possible, be breathing in that fresh air, be looking outside and observing the world, watching the clouds go past, you know, all of that kind of stuff. Know that you are not alone. Use the resources that you have at your disposal. Go online, have a look at what other people are saying, read tips, read techniques, try things. If you're looking for a little bit of empathy, if you're just looking for another perspective, if you feel alone, if you feel alienated, then watching a video like this, I mean, there's absolutely tons of them. Looking at blog posts about depression, there's tons of them. And sometimes it can empower you, but it's very important for you to notice whether or not they empower you or whether they just feed into your depression. And this is something that only you can know. Like I said at the beginning of the video, there is no blanket statement. There is no one size fits all. And when we try and enforce that, that's where stuff starts to go wrong. So that's where checking in with yourself is so gosh darn important. Because whenever you put a new piece of advice or guidance into the mix, it's up to you to notice how that makes you feel. What does that do to your vibration? What does that do to your thought pattern? For a lot of people, being able to get that empathy that comes from tapping into resources that are written by people with depression and knowing that there are those resources out there and there are people that feel the same way as you is very empowering. But for some other people it's not. For some other people it just feeds into the low and it makes things even darker and murkier and yuckier. So it's really important for you to understand from a personal perspective what works for you, and that I would encourage. And I would also say, as an aside to that, this is your journey. This is nobody else's journey. So please don't feel browbeaten by advice that just does not click with you, that you are not feeling you're getting anything from, but you feel like you have to do it because such and such a person said you should do it, or your therapist, you know, insisted and browbeated you into doing it. If something isn't working for you, then it's your duty to own that and to try different techniques. And don't just wait for, you know, your favourite person who makes videos, or your favourite author, or your therapist, or a friend that's helping you. Don't wait for them to give you that next stepping stone. Be actively looking for the next stepping stone. And I'm not saying that this is about finding a way to heal from depression. I'm saying this is about finding a way to make sure that it's not over your head all the time. It's about finding ways to gracefully tread water when the tide is high. I'm not saying that you're going to find this amazing cure where the tide will never be high again. I'm not saying that. I still get times where I wake up and it's just, I'm blue, and I know that it's that. But at this point, I've just got it on lockdown. I really have, and I believe that that is possible if people find the techniques. And I don't think it's about insisting that the depression goes away. It's not about that at all. It's about realistically taking ownership and being accountable for your journey, and being accountable for how you want to show up even in the midst of depression, and how you want to live your life in spite of the depression. Exercise and diet are big ones, and this is something that so many people will say on so many different forums, across so many different mediums, and it's true. Exercise and diet are really the keystones for a lot of stuff to do with depression. It's not going to help you. If you've got depression, if you are chronically depressed and you're going through a really bad episode, eating junk food is not going to help you. Not keeping yourself adequately hydrated, it's not going to help you. You know, none of that stuff is going to help. It's going to be far more helpful for you to like eat a banana or make yourself a green smoothie, or it's just going to be more helpful. Sleeping is the same. It can be very difficult. Sleeping patterns are very difficult when you're depressed. You're either sleeping all the hours God sends and you can barely get yourself out of bed, or you're like you are a complete insomniac and you're just not getting any sleep at all. So that can be difficult if you're not on medication, which also, like if you're not on an antidepressant, for example, that has a sedative in it, then quite often you are going to end up being an insomniac, or you're going to end up sleeping a lot. And it's just really important to notice when you're feeding into those patterns, okay? Nobody's saying that you should be sleeping 8 hours a night and you should have no problems with your sleeping pattern. But what I am saying is, if you know that you drink 3 coffees before you go to bed and then you put on a documentary or a movie that you want to watch, then you know deep down that you're feeding into the issues with your sleep cycle. So this is really just about responsibility. It's not about, you know, finding a way to cure it. It's not about kind of, you know, telling yourself that there's something that you're not doing that would make it go away. It's just about taking ownership for what you can do. It's about taking ownership for what you can control. And when I started to do that a decade ago, everything started to change. You know, when I took accountability for the fact that I knew that there were certain things that I could do that would make me feel better. I knew there were certain things that I was doing that were exacerbating the depression and making it worse. And when I started to own that, that was where the empowerment came, and that was where the light started to come through for me. Find new inspiration, go out there and find stuff to interest you, to enliven you. Learn about something new. And again, it can be so difficult to find the motivation, so just cut the goal down into the smallest possible segments that you can muster. You know, if you can only learn 2 facts about something that you've really wanted to learn about for ages, learn those 2 facts, write them down, and then carry on with the day. If that's really all you can manage, then that is all you can conceivably manage, and that's okay, you know. Try meditation. It really might be your bag. It was definitely my bag, you know. I started meditating when I was 19 to kind of deal with anger management issues and stuff like that. I read in a magazine that they were teaching it to men who were in prison for violent crimes, and it was like totally changing them, and they were coming out of prison different characters, and I thought I could do with a slice of that. And I've been messing around with meditation ever since, and it absolutely has helped me with my depression. It's helped me to place it into perspective. It's helped me to find the concentration and clarity of mind to put the steps into place that I need to put into place, you know, to get that momentum going that I was talking about earlier. when your mind is just awash with murky crap and it's just all very ugly and horrible and yucky and you're drowning in it, it's very hard to put one foot in front of the other, even if you know what would make it better, even if you know that going for a quick walk around the block would make all the world of difference. It's really difficult to find the focus to put one foot in front of the other sometimes. Meditation has been life-changing, game-changing, awe-inspiring for me when it comes to that. Just utterly invaluable. Accepting my depression was useful for me. Accepting it, but knowing that it doesn't run the show just because it's not going away. You know, people very often look at depression on this ridiculous, like, it's just like, what, it's just a polarity. It's either, it's not going anywhere and it's absolutely going to screw my life up forever, or I'm going to completely emancipate myself from it and then I'm going to be free of it and then life's going to be amazing. It doesn't need to be like that. There's a whole load of different possibilities on a spectrum between those 2 points, between those 2 extremes. For me, you know, I know that sometimes throughout my life, for as long as I live on this earth in the kind of body and the ego that I'm in now, I'm going to get times where I'm going to be blue for no gosh darn reason, and it's going to be difficult and it's going to be tough and it's going to feel very specific. It's going to be that black wave, and I'm now no longer trying to emancipate myself from it. I'm not trying to run from it. I know when it shows up and I check in with myself and I'm with myself. And that makes all the world of difference. So accepting it, owning it, and knowing that I'm accountable for the fact that I understand that I've got depression. I'm accountable for what happens from that point on. I have the information, I've armed myself with the knowledge, and now it's my decision if I want to make, like, you know, the star in tarot, or if I want to be like the 5 cups in tarot. Do I want to shroud myself in it? Do I want to feed it? Do I want to, you know, kind of enjoy it in some fucked up way? Do I want to give myself over to it? Do I want to convince myself there's nothing I can do to help myself through it? Or do I want to show up? Do I want to bring it to the table? Do I want to help myself, nurture myself, love myself? Do I want to learn about myself through the medium of depression, through the lens of depression? Do I want to make it into a positive thing for me, make it into something where I'm always learning more from it and I'm always adding to the techniques and it's always building, you know? And making this video is something positive that has come out of me having depression, so, you know, there's no way that those things don't happen. Consider the role of spirituality and how it factors in for you. For me, it factored in with things like meditation, ritual, recognising the power of that stuff. For you, it might be something different. This is something that I'm going to talk about much more in the coming months. I feel like when I talk about my own story and when I talk about my own perceptions, it helps more people, which is really important for me. So if you have any questions, please leave them down below. I'll be very happy to answer them. And until the next time I discuss this topic, just please know that you're not alone. There are many resources out there that you can tap into. There is so much inspiration that you can take from, and that depression doesn't have to mean the end. It doesn't have to mean that you're trapped. It doesn't have to mean that you can't help yourself, that you're helpless. And just please know that, and please know that there's no need for you to feel alienated, there's no need for you to feel isolated. We're all here, a lot of us feel the same kinds of things, a lot of us are trying to get through the same kinds of things. And again, if you have questions, if you have queries for me, please leave them below. I will try to answer every single one of them, and I will tackle this issue again on the channel. So if you have things that you'd like me to tackle in the next video, then please do make yourself known and give your questions to me. I'll do my best to answer them. Very much love. Blessed be.